Today we're looking at Starfield and the RTX 4060. Now, it's going to be very similar to my last video with the 4090, but there's a small twist. You see, with the 4090, all we did was take the best components we could get, like the 7800X 3D, and we paired it with the 4090 to make sure that there was no bottlenecks or anything like that. However, today is the exact opposite. It is bottleneck city. This is a budget PC that I am giving away to a friend of mine as a special surprise later on this month. There will be a full video on that. If you want to see it, get subscribed. But today we're looking at this entire budget PC and asking the question, can it run Starfield? Because yes, not only are we looking at the RTX 4060, but it's paired with an AMD Ryzen 3800X. In fact, everything in this system is basically a bottleneck to some degree, from the RAM to the motherboard. It's basically all just a big bottleneck, but it is a budget PC. I've been wanting to do a PC giveaway as a special surprise for somebody for a very long time now. And unfortunately, I'm not like the big guys yet. I don't have a bunch of sponsors I can call up and say, hey, send me over all the parts I want so I can give it away. It doesn't work that way. So I've had to take my time, piece all this stuff together. A lot of it is leftover parts from previous builds I used to have or my wife used to have or whatever. But hey, it's going to be free for somebody. But before I give it away, I want to take a look at how well it performs in Starfield. So I have all the specs on the screen right now. Obviously, with a build like this, we're going to be starting at 1080p and we'll see what that can do, and then we'll take it from there. If you're new, get subscribed. If you like it, hit the like button. Massive shout out to all my Patreon members. You guys are the backbone of the channel and you really help me make content like this possible. So thank you so much. And without any further ado, let's get into today's benchmarks. And now we're taking a look at 1080p, ultra settings, no FSR, no dynamic resolution, scaling, and no motion blur, but everything else is set to ultra. RTX 4060 with the AMD Ryzen 3800X here in New Atlantis, and you can see we're averaging about 36 FPS. Depending on where we are on the map, that average will rise and fall, again, just completely depending on what's going on. Now, we do know that Starfield is incredibly CPU demanding. And even though the 4060 is not exactly a super fast card, the 3800X is able to cause bottlenecks. And I know you're going to look at that GPU utilization and say, oh, you're getting good usage, it's fine. It's not fine. Trust me, you're going to see that, because as we start to lower the settings, yes, the frame rate will go up, but it does not go up the way that you would expect it to. Yes, I'm aware of GPU busy. I have not had a chance to play around with it, so I'm sorry that is not listed here, but I got some pretty cool tricks I want to show you during the benchmarks here, so hang tight with me. As you can see, the average FPS has now gone up to 43 FPS, and so again, like I said earlier, it's completely dependent on where you are on the map. This is everything maxed out at 1080p with the RTX 4060 and a 3800X. And so if you have a little bit of a lower end system, or it's definitely a budget PC you're putting together, or something that you put together a few years ago, all hope is not yet lost, because Starfield runs at 30 FPS on the Xbox Series X. You're still able to get above 30 FPS in situations like this, so that's actually a pretty good sign here. And now we're looking at 1080p on the high preset. Again, no FSR, no dynamic resolution scaling, and no motion blur. And as you can see, our average frame rate has basically started where our other one finished, which is around 42 to 43 FPS. And so there is a little bit of a performance increase there, going from ultra down to high, but it's nothing substantial or anything like that. And ultra settings are typically a point of diminishing returns. And like I pointed out in my 4090 video, Starfield is not a game you want to use ultra settings. It makes no sense at all. It's overly demanding for the sake of being demanding. But as you can see here, when we're using the high preset at 1080p, we are hovering more in the 40s and even touching above 50 FPS, depending on what section of New Atlantis we're exploring. That's all a really good thing here. That's awesome. We still can't quite hit that 60 FPS, but let's see what happens whenever we drop things down to medium. And now we're looking at things at 1080p on the medium preset. Again, no motion blur, no FSR, and no dynamic resolution scaling. And now our starting FPS is above 50, finally. So our starting FPS is around 51 FPS. There will obviously be some dips as we continue to explore the New Atlantis area, but this is definitely more of an ideal situation here. You want to be as close to that 60 FPS marker as possible. Now, clearly, as you can see, we're not hitting 60 FPS. We're not really even getting close to it, unfortunately, on our average. Occasionally, we'll peak up to 57 FPS, I think at one point is what I saw, but typically we're hovering closer to the early 50s, 51, 52, 53 FPS. Still not quite where we want it to be, but overall, this is definitely a way better experience and definitely much more playable than what we saw on Ultra or High, and definitely better than what you would see on a console locked at 30 FPS. But this is what I want to show you. Look at that GPU utilization. As you can see, we are now falling below 90% in some situations. And so that is starting to really show the bottleneck that is going on with the 3800X on the 4060 here. And now we're looking at 1080p on the low preset. Once again, we're still not hitting that 60 FPS magical number. We are closer to it than we've ever been. We are still peaking around 57 FPS and averaging about 55 FPS, and our GPU utilization is definitely now on the lower side of things. You would expect to see, hey, we're using the lowest preset possible. Jack those numbers up to 60 FPS or higher, right? But unfortunately, that is simply not happening. We clearly have a limitation here with really the entire PC because it is a more of a lower end budget tier PC, but that 3800X is definitely holding back the 4060 here. In addition to that, this game is just incredibly CPU limiting, CPU demanding, and honestly just not that well optimized overall. Even on the lowest preset at 1080p, we cannot hit 60 FPS. But what happens if we turn on FSR? And now we're back at 1080p on the Ultra preset, but now we're actually using FSR. And as you can see, even with FSR, we are still nowhere near 60 FPS. Again, it is Ultra, so it's definitely going to be more demanding. But yeah, we're only averaging about 40 to 41 FPS, unfortunately. Again, a few areas where we peak up above that, of course, depending on where we are. And I do understand that Ultra settings are incredibly demanding. However, I would figure with FSR, we should at least be able to get up to 60 FPS because FSR means we're not actually using a native 1080p. We're actually using a resolution lower than that and upscaling up to 1080p. But even with doing that, we still cannot get 60 FPS. Okay, this is very important. I have done a bunch of other testing not currently shown here. 1080p on the high preset, medium preset, and even the low preset with FSR still does not yield us 60 FPS on average. You heard that correctly. So what I've done now is I have literally turned down everything to its lowest setting possible. This means it is 1080p on the low preset, FSR enabled, dynamic resolution scaling enabled, motion blur turned off, and our render resolution is set all the way down to 50%. Everything that can be turned down is officially turned down. And as you can see, we are still not hitting 60 FPS. I do not have a frame rate lock or limit on my monitor or anything like that. This is not locked to 60 FPS or below. Nothing like that. Everything here is uncapped. We simply cannot generate more than 60 frames while using a 3800X at 1080p with a 4060 in Starfield. It just isn't happening here, at least not in New Atlantis. Now again, if you pay attention to the GPU utilization, you will see as clear as day that we are nowhere near 99% utilization. We're down in the 60s and 70s. It's pretty bad. Now, most of that has to do with the fact that we're using upscaling, so therefore it's a lower native resolution and we're upscaling the 1080p. And so the upscaling technology is taking a lot of the load off the GPU. But then I got to thinking about it. Okay, well, at 1080p, we're more CPU bound than GPU bound. So why don't we just try to become more GPU bound? And how can you do that? Well, the easiest way of doing that is to increase the resolution. Let's do the unthinkable. Instead of going down in resolution, let's go up and see what happens. As you can see, the image quality here is absolutely atrocious. So let's see what happens if we improve the image quality by increasing the resolution. And here you go, 1440p on the medium preset, FSR enabled, dynamic resolution scaling enabled, motion blur turned off, and our render resolution is 50%. And as you can see, it's 1440p. It's a higher tier of resolution, and our frame rate is actually about the same, if not better. We're averaging 56 FPS and the image is noticeably cleaner. But can we get above 60 FPS if we keep these settings but turn it down to low? Yes, we can. We have officially hit an average of 60 FPS. And as I'm saying that, of course, the average is falling down to 58, 59 FPS. But the fact remains, we were actually able to hit 60 FPS and even hit 61 FPS for the first time during this entire benchmark run. So by increasing the resolution just a little bit, we became ever so slightly more GPU bound, and we were able to clean up the image some and still get a little bit more performance out of the PC overall. And as you can see right now, we're actually holding pretty steady at 60, 61 FPS. And so I'll take that all day long. But now after discovering this, I want to know what happens at 4K. The 4060 is not a 4K GPU, but for a very specific situation like this, let's see what happens. And here we are, 4K resolution, FSR enabled, render resolution 50%, dynamic resolution scaling enabled, and no motion blur. And we are actually on the medium preset, not the low preset, the medium preset. And as you can see, our frame rate is averaging around 46 to 47 FPS. Every now and again, we're actually peaking above 50 FPS, and our image quality is noticeably cleaner. It is so much more clear. This looks significantly better than what we were experiencing back all the way down at 1080p. Now, this is incredibly odd. It really is. But as you can see, our GPU utilization, even while using upscaling technologies, is sitting strong at 99%, every now and again touching 97, 98%, and our average frame rate is actually increasing up to around 49 FPS. And so by increasing the resolution, we got off of the CPU limitation at 1080p. We became more GPU bound at 1440p and even more GPU bound at 4K. And now the PC, even though it is a lower end PC, it's able to stretch its legs a little bit more, and you can see the type of results you get when that happens. No, it's not a full 60 FPS, but this is more than playable, and the image quality is significantly better, and it's still way better than what you would get on the Xbox locked at 30 FPS. And that's it for all the benchmarks. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about everything we just talked about? Were you surprised by anything? I was. At 1080p, I really expected around the low to medium settings, we would easily be able to get 65 FPS, maybe even touch 70 FPS, but we couldn't do it. And then again, I was surprised when actually increasing the resolution basically improved performance. And it depends on how you want to look at that. At 1440p, we were able to hit 60 FPS at 1440p low. And then at 4K on medium, I would make the argument that the image quality looked just as good, if not better, than 1080p native on ultra. And the frame rate performance was about the same. And that's pretty shocking, but it makes sense, right? Because if you have a game that is CPU limited like Starfield, at 1080p, all you're doing is adding more to that limitation because 1080p is a CPU limited resolution. But as you get higher in resolution, 1440p, 4K, you start to eliminate that CPU limitation. You start to become more GPU bound. And now the PC can open up and spread its wings a little bit more. Overall, the game as a whole is just a CPU limited game. Even at 4K with my 4090 and 7800X 3D, I'm not getting the performance I would expect to see. But with all that being said, it's pretty cool that if you have a lower end system and if you have a CPU bottleneck somewhere, if you have another monitor laying around that is a higher resolution monitor, try connecting your PC to that and seeing if that helps out a little bit. It's worth a try. It worked for me on this particular PC. It might work for you as well. Hey, if you like the video, do me a favor, hit that like button because it goes a long way in helping me out. If you're new, get subscribed. And until next time, E-Rock out.